Hi guys, this video is going to be my riding journey and how I went from riding little school ponies to being the big and competitive equestrian that I am now. I think the first time I ever sat on a horse was at a birthday party or a little fair, and I fell in love with the horse and I asked my mom if I could take lessons, so she signed me up, and little did she know how far that would lead. I spent my first year of riding on school horses, learning the basics and even going to a few lead line shows, including the Hampton Classic to finish off the summer. I fell in love with riding, and I definitely knew that I would be doing this for the rest of my life. This was my first Hampton Classic, and I was able to do it on this cute little pony named Wiz. I even finished off my first year with my first time cantering on a horse that was definitely a little bit too big for me. And I knew after this moment that I would be cantering many, many more times. And shortly after, I somehow convinced my mom to let me lease a little pony, and I got introduced to Jake. So Jake would really just take me into my first year, kind of teach me the ropes of the show ring and going on my own in the show ring, and even cantering and starting some small jumps. This was my first ever show not on the lead, and as you can see, I got him moving, he was marching along, and I even got to do some small jumps at the end of the year. I then finished off my summer with lots of pony camp and, of course, the Hampton Classic before saying a sad goodbye to my first ever pony and getting introduced to Ralphie. Ralphie honestly was a one-of-a-kind pony. He taught me so much about jumping, and he honestly taught me everything I know about riding and the basics in general. I leased him for about 3 years, and he taught me so much just as I was learning how to jump. I even did my first ever gymnastics with him, and here it is. I've definitely improved in my gymnastic skills since that day. We spent our first 2 years together, kind of him teaching me through the short stirrup and kind of more in the show ring, and by the third year we were really starting to advance, and I was able to start jumping a little bit higher at around 2-foot courses. I got 9th place in my first ever Hampton Classic not on lead line, and I was so thrilled. I remember loving the silver ribbon. Sadly, after every Hampton Classic, we get back into the cold winter, so we spent another year doing more practice and more work over jumps before heading off into the spring for another show season. Of course, we finished off this year with the Hampton Classic as well, and I beat myself from the year before getting 5th in the over fences, and yeah, I took him through the fall and the winter before we would start looking for a new pony in the spring. It was definitely by this time that I had started jumping more consistent 2-foot courses, and I was definitely getting more comfortable with the higher jumps. I even had my first ever blue ribbon in a show, which I got in the walk trot, and I ended up getting reserve champion in the equitation and champion in the hunters. And I got my first ever champion and my first ever reserve in the same show. None of this could have been possible without Ralphie. I am forever thankful for everything that he's taught me. I then got introduced to Little Lando, and many of you still know him because I rode him last summer. He's on the older side, but he definitely had more spunk than any pony I had ever ridden before. He could jump bigger, and he was able to teach me and get me so confident moving up in height. I remember he was always so terrified of the flower boxes that were under the jumps, and I would have to jump it a few times with him over jumping before he would settle down and jump it like a normal pony. This was our first ever show together, and it was a little short stirrup derby, and we ended up with 3rd place, which I remember being so happy with. And I rode him through the winter until in the spring when we started to be able to show even more. both years I leased Lando were definitely some of the best. I would come home from every single show with at least 2 blue ribbons and a smile on my face. And I finished off the year in the Hampton Classic, where I ended up getting my first ever Hampton Classic blue ribbon in the walk trot event. And as you know, after the Hampton Classic, we're back to another cold winter. But honestly, I used to love the cold winters because this is around when COVID was, and I was able to go and skip remote school so that I could go ride, which obviously was my dream in the first place. I learned so much in this next winter that when we started in the spring, we were right back into the show ring and I was able to start competing him again. Lando honestly taught me so much, and I would not be anywhere I am now without him. Obviously, as you can see in this video, he was definitely one of the spunkiest ponies I've ever ridden, but somehow I always came home with a blue ribbon. He taught me how to ride everything. I could not be more thankful for everything that he taught me. I even ended up getting reserve champion at USHJA finals at Princeton, and I was so thrilled with that. I think one of our years together, we even got bronze in the overall year awards. And once again, we finished off our year in the Hampton Classic and ended up with a second, a third, and a ninth. He then took me through my first ever non-short stirrup horse show where I competed in the 2-foot and ended up doing my first ever victory gallop after getting third in the Derby. Even though Lando was definitely not the easiest to ride, he taught me so much and I could never be more thankful for that. And I would not be where I am without Lando. As I started to grow out of the small ponies, my trainer found this large pony for me to ride, and his name was JB. I tried a few ponies, but honestly, I could not have chosen a better one than JB to be my first pony that I could really start moving up in height. We used the showless winter as a way to get to know each other before starting to compete in the 2'6" in the spring. Our first couple of shows together were definitely rainy, so it was kind of hard to get used to jumping bigger jumps and in the pouring rain and on a larger pony than I'd ever been used to. But we got through it, and we ended up getting some good ribbons as well as having an amazing time. We had a little bit more practice before the summer started, and as soon as the summer was started, we were able to go to another show, which I ended up getting my first ever champion on him with. And it would only keep going from here, as after this, we really got to know each other, and I think we really clicked as we started to get even more top results in the shows. We went to Fairfield right before the Hampton Classic to get used to riding him on the grass, and that also went amazingly as we came home with champion there as well. It was then time for the annual Hampton Classic, and this year definitely didn't disappoint, as JB and I won the Classic with a score of 83 and 84. We even got to do a little victory gallop and got a cool blanket. I was also able to catch ride a lot during this year, which I had such a fun time on, and we even qualified for Marshall and Sterling finals, which to this day is my favorite show I've ever been to. After that first win at Princeton in the beginning of the summer, we just kept on doing amazingly, and we even got third overall in the medal, second in one of the over fences, and fourth in the Hudson Equitation. We finished off our time together in a clinic that my trainer had hosted before I started looking for large ponies. And many of you know who this is. Obviously, now is where I start my journey with Apollo. I have a whole separate video of our journey to pony finals together, which is definitely recommend you go watch because it shows kind of the in-depth of when everything happened in our training together. I got him right around Christmas time, so we were able to spend Christmas and the beginning of the year together, getting to know each other before we would starting out in the 2-6 together in the spring. Our first show together went amazingly. We were half a point away from reserve champion and ended up winning the Classic with a score of 85 and 83. He was beyond amazing, and I knew from this day on that we would definitely be making it to pony finals. We continued practicing through the spring and realizing that he had already been qualified by one of the girls that rode him at WEF over the winter. So now that we were qualified, all we had to do was just prep before pony finals. We went to hits and got reserve champion in the warm-up classes and champion in our division classes the next days. And after that, we just went up in height, getting more comfortable over bigger fences and getting ready for pony finals, as this would be my first ever pony finals and first ever huge finals that I would ever go to. And before we knew it, we were off at pony finals and getting ready to show in the huge Rolex Stadium. We ended up having high scores in the 70s in the model, low 80s in the undersaddle, and sadly some lead change issues popping down our score in the jumping, but overall we had such an amazing time and I could not be more happy with how it went. I learned so much and I'm so thankful for everyone who made pony finals possible for me. I also have a pony finals vlog, so you should definitely go watch that. And right after pony finals, we were back to it, getting ready for the Hampton Classic, which we did definitely amazing this year. It was really hard competition as I was against all of the best riders in the division, but we ended up doing super well and ending with some high top ribbons. We even qualified for Marshall and Sterling finals and were able to go later in the fall. We ended up with third in the Hudson Neck, third in our Hunter over fences, and I think fourth in the medal. After Marshall and Sterling finals, we continued to practice and we even ended up changing to a different facility. And right after we moved, I was able to head over to Old Salem, where I did another 2-6 show, which would be my last show ever with Apollo, and my last show ever, I guess, on a pony, because after Apollo, would move up to a horse. I did the Hunters and the medal the first day of the show, and then the second day I was able to have my first ever competition in the jumpers. I had so much fun, and little did I know I would be getting back into it today. I finished off my winter with a great training time with Apollo. I learned so much in this winter and definitely focused so much on my rhythm, my flat work, and everything kind of got put together at the end of the year. And in about February, I headed down to WEF to try some horses that I could potentially lease. I tried around 6 horses while I was down there, kind of not looking for a specific division type, but more one that I could do all 3 rings with. And I even got to show this horse named Enzo, which ended up being the horse that I chose to bring home with me. He was a great hunter equitation, but he could also play around in the jumpers if I wanted to, which I knew was going to be very, very fun. It was so cool trying all these different horses and kind of seeing the horse world at WEF, because I had only been there one other time before. Yeah, and I really got to see everything. I even got to try a jumper horse, which was so awesome. And yeah, it was honestly just so much fun. But a couple weeks later, I think maybe in the beginning of April, is when Enzo came down and I was able to start riding him. From about the beginning of April to the beginning of June is when I was able to kind of get to know Enzo and start having more consistent lessons on him as I was getting to know how to ride horse, because I had only ever leased ponies before. And yeah, we were definitely having a great time together. He was much more forward and much more horsepower filled than I had any horse I had ever ridden previously, but I was getting to know him quickly and we were able to start showing in the beginning of June, right before I finished school. Our first few shows together, we just did simple one-day shows, and this is our first one. We competed in the jumpers, and we didn't try to go fast or anything like that. We just wanted to kind of see how he was in the show ring, as he still was a pretty young and green horse. And of course, he was amazing, so we had planned to do the Hunter Derby at the next one-day show that came up a few weeks later. We had a little bit of practice time in between before heading off to that show, and it honestly went so amazingly. We had an amazing round, except for one rail, which knocked us out of competing for the second round, which was the handy. And I honestly had such an amazing time, and we were able to do that show and then one more after that, which was another little local one-day show in the 2'6", before we started getting ready to compete at the 3 foot together. And And at this show, which was our last show in the 2-6 together, we ended up bringing home champion in our equitation medals, which I was so thrilled about. And after this, we started prepping even more in the 3-foot height so that we could get ready for hits, which would be happening at the beginning of August. Honestly, I felt so comfortable on Enzo, even considering how much stronger and how much bigger he was than anything else I had ridden in the past. We clicked really fast, and I had so much fun riding him throughout the summer. And through this summer, I had found my love for competing in the equitation, which is what I did mostly at hits. I was able to do, I think, a 3-foot medal, and then I did the 2-9 equitation. Here's our 3-foot medal from the first day. He was definitely a bit excited, as we hadn't been to an away show since he came to us. So he was definitely excited, but he was amazing, and we ended up slightly out of the ribbons. I'm not sure why. We had a pretty good round. And then in our 2-9 equitations, we got second in the flat and fourth in one of our over fences, which I was beyond happy with. He honestly was so perfect every single round this weekend, and I could not have been more happy with how it went for our first show and my first show in the 3-foot, but our first show in the 3-foot together. And then we came back home for a couple of weeks before we wanted to get out and start practicing on the grass to prepare for the Hampton Classic. So we headed off to Fairfield. One day we showed in the sand, and the first day we showed in the grass. And he was so amazing, and I was definitely feeling so comfortable at the 3-foot height and feeling ready for the Hampton Classic as well, which I was so excited for, which would be happening, I think, the week after Fairfield. We ended up bringing home 3rd and 4th out of a big group in some of our over fences rounds, as well as 5th in the hack. And then it was time for the Hampton Classic, which are these clips that you're seeing now. We ended up with 8th in the equitation flat out of around 25 horses, as well as 9th in our first equitation class that was connected to the flat. And we even ended up getting 5th in our Marshall and Sterling medal, which qualified us for Marshall and Sterling, which I was so thrilled about. I remember we were in 4th place pretty much throughout the entire class of around 25 people, and the last person that went knocked me down to 5th, so I wasn't able to do the test, but I still had so much fun. We also scored an 80 in one of our hunter over fences, putting us in 4th, and a 78 in our second, which put us in 8th. I was beyond thrilled with everything that happened at the Hampton Classic. It was definitely one of our best shows together. We even ended up out of I think 37 horses, which is where we got the 4th place from before, and 48 horses as it was combined with the olders, and we ended up getting 5th out of all of them, and we even had a victory gallop. And after that, we had about a week of practice before he would head off to hits again for Marshall and Sterling finals, which is my favorite show of the year, and it's my favorite show ever. We did some fun bounces before heading off, and my first class was the Derby. It was my first time ever placing in a national Derby, and we came 10th out of 33 people, with the adults and the kids all combined into one class. It was super hard competition, but I had an amazing time. We even did some of the high options, which were setting at 3'3", and we, of course, got a beautiful blue ribbon as well as a victory gallop. The next couple of days, we were in the hunters, and I ended up with an 83 getting second in one of our over fences, which was out of the a huge group in the children's classes, so that was so much fun. And before I knew it, the fall show season was over, and we were back to showing in the cold winter. I ended up moving on to a jumper horse named Whisper, and he'll be teaching me through the winter, as well as I will be riding my trainer's pony named Mickey, and I will be helping him learn his way through the greens as he's only 6 years old. I'm learning so much about what it means to be a jumper rider, and I'm definitely getting more technical in my riding, and I'm so excited to continue my journey into the jumpers. Anyways, that's my horse riding journey. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!